So good morning, everyone, and welcome back to AWP Theory Sessions. Let me present this thing. So we are continuing our first unit, refreshing JavaScript and CSS, where I can say that we have gone through CSS part. So we have seen CSS benefits, syntaxes, and responsive design, how we can achieve responsive design through percentage or using media queries. And in the last lecture, we have also gone through the Bootstrap part, CSS framework. So we make use of Bootstrap CSS, and we have also created one kind of a page where we have generated menu, then the heading slider. We have gone for column structure, where we have presented some cards and an image and content. And we looked at some portion of the Bootstrap documentation so that you can understand how we use it and how we can generate entire website using Bootstrap if you want. Later on, we also discussed how we can overwrite Bootstrap classes and how we can generate our own class and apply that alongside the Bootstrap class. So that's what we have covered till now. Focusing next point, is based on the JavaScript now. So starting from today, we want to go for refreshing our knowledge on the JavaScript. Now, you might have already learned entire JavaScript section, right, in the previous semester, where you have learned basics of JavaScript, how you can use JavaScript and where to write JavaScript code and all those things. But let us quickly revise those things and have some introduction part here. So where do we put JavaScript code? So there are multiple ways we can do it. We may either go for inline JavaScript, or maybe we can have a document level JavaScript, or we may have external JavaScript file. So JavaScript is to manipulate our HTML content elements, right? Now, up to some extent, we can write JavaScript in inline for some HTML events, like on click, on blur, on submit, and all those events. We can write inline JavaScript code. Or what we can do is we can have a script tag within our HTML page, right? And that we can say a document level JavaScript. Or we can place our entire JavaScript code in a external source file, which will have .js extension, right? And it only contains the JavaScript statements. Now, how do we link our JavaScript file, external JavaScript file, to the HTML file? So once we create a JavaScript file, a separate source file having .js extension, we use the same script tag here, okay? But along with that script tag, we define source attribute, okay? So there are two ways. One way is document level JavaScript, where we say script, then we define type, textless JavaScript, and we write entire JavaScript code within this pair of script tags. Or else what we can do is we can write our entire code in a separate file, and we can link, or we can apply that JavaScript file in the source attribute, script tag, and then source attribute, and we apply script.js file. Make sure when you have source attribute in a script tag, you do not write anything in between these starting and ending script tags, okay? Because whenever a browser finds the source attribute, it is going to neglect everything written in between these two tags, right? So if we apply source, then there should be nothing in between these two tags. And if you want to write some codes here, then you may have a separate script tag for that, which does not have source attribute. Fine. So that's what the JavaScript, how we can apply JavaScript, right? Then you have also gone for a number of objects in the JavaScript. Basics of objects you have already gone through, like math object, string object, and all those things. But there are a number of inbuilt objects, and you might have already create your own object. So there are a few fundamental objects by which we can create our own object, or we can have other objects also in the JavaScript. And those are, we can say, the basic objects which can contain anything. So the first one is the simple object, or we can create a function object also, where we can assign a function. There is a Boolean object having Boolean data, true and false. And there may be symbol objects also. So you can generate few symbols if you want, kind of a label, let's say. So these are the basic objects, and based on these objects, other objects has been generated. Object you have used already, where you might have generated a student object, and you have number of properties in that object, like subjects and marks and all those things. Even you can go for nesting of objects in JavaScript, and an object can have one property which in turn is an object. So that's also possible. So these are few basic objects. You have also generated functions, and knowingly or unknowingly, you have used these function objects to assign to other property also, maybe, but we'll see that thing today also. So these are few basic objects. Then there are other objects also. There are error objects, objects related to errors. So when we see error handling, you can use these error objects. And when we say there is an object, there are number of properties in it. So for that, we are going to use these objects. So if there is any error generated and we want to handle that error, then we may have error object, simple error, or if you want to be more specific, then there are a number of other error objects, like evaluation error, internal error of any code. Then there is a range error object, defining a range from particular starting point to ending point. Maybe the reference error, you're referring something else, and if it is not possible, if that generates any error. Then there is a syntax error. If you are defining some resource using URI, then there may be URI error. So these are few more specific error objects which you can use whenever there is an error generated. Or even you can use this normal error object to throw your customized error. So maybe you are trying something, and if you want to throw user-defined customized error, then you can generate this error object and throw that error object using throw statement. And these fundamentals you have already gone through in Java also. Just like Java, try, catch, finally, there is a block. We have in JavaScript also, we have this error handling part. So those are the error objects. Then there are numbers and dates and those objects also. There is a number object which defines a number. If you want to have a big integer, then there is a big integer object. You have also math object, just like a math.random function. If you want to generate a random number, then you can use math object and use the random method of math object to generate random numbers. Even math object gives you a number of other things, like you want to have a log calculation to the base e, to the base 2, to the base 10. Then there are log functions, ln functions, math.py also. So that gives you the value of pi. Even you can find square root using math object. There are a number of methods in math object also, like trigonometry functions. Even absolute function is there, the sine, cos, tan h, sine, and all those functions. Even floor and sail functions are there. So there are a number of functions in math object, functions and properties both. So you can use this math object for those kind of operations, right? So that's what the math object is. Then there is a date object. So if you want to work with a date, then you can use date object, where you can parse a particular date, and you can extract day, month, year, and all those things. Even using date object, you can fetch the current date and time using now function, right? So there are a number of methods in this date object, like get date, get day, get hours, get minutes, get month, get seconds, get year, and all those things. So those are a few more methods in the date object which we can use if we want to work with the date, right? So these are the inbuilt objects available in JavaScript, and we can directly have an object for these things. And once we have the object, we can work around, we can access number of properties and methods. Now, if you want to explore these objects more, look, I believe that you have used number of objects earlier, so I'm not going to have any practical explanation here. But still, if you want to go for these objects, then Mozilla Developer Network MDN website is the best one to explore all these objects, right? Then there is a text related few objects there. So maybe the string object. Now, when you have a string, obviously you may go for finding a string length, or you may match your string with other regular expression, or you can concat two strings, or let's say you find a particular character at a given index. Even you can find character code at a particular index. Then you can do plenty of things with that thing. You can match it, you can search, you can find a substring from the given string, and also you can, if that is a numeric string, then you can find a value also, right? So those are the string object properties or the methods. Then there is a regular expression object. Now, regular expression will be using also in the form validation practical number 1 that we are going through. So you can define your regular expression as an object, and then there are a number of properties, like if you want to ignore your case or what. If you want to ignore the case when you are matching that regular expression, then whether you want to cover multi-line comparison in that, whether that will be strictly or what. Then there are few methods also. You may execute that regular expression over a string or the given parameter, or you may test your regular expression for a given string, which will simply give you true or false kind of result. So for those kind of comparisons and extraction part, you can use regular expression. Now, as I said, we'll be using this regular expression in the form validation, because when we say there is a structure, there is a fixed kind of structure, and we want to verify that structure. For example, password must have one capital letter, one small letter, one special symbol, and so on. And it must be minimum 6 character length. And there are a number of constraints, let's say, on the password. Now, if you want to verify all those things, then we don't go for the separate comparisons there. We define a regular expression for that, and we simply test that regular expression on the given password. If that regular expression is being fulfilled, then we say password is okay. Look, we say password is okay. We don't say password is correct. Okay. We simply verify the structure of the password. So that's one thing. Another thing, maybe let's say the email address is having a predefined structure there, right? So like for email address, there must be email ID part, user ID, and then @ sign, and then there must be a domain and so on. So there is a predefined structure also. It should not have space in between. And after @ there must be domain and the .com, .co, .in, .uk, .org or something like that. So all those things must be fulfilled. Then and then we can say that email ID is a valid email ID. So if we want to go for those kind of comparisons, then we use regular expressions, because going for all those constraints independently is not feasible. And that's why we define a regular expression where we can verify all those constraints in a single shot. So that's the regular expression object. Then there are indexed collections also. The basic or the very first thing to understand indexed collection is the array. But there are a number of different types of arrays in JavaScript. So you may simply go for the normal array, which you might have used. But if you want to optimize your code based on your application, then you may define whether it is integer array, float array, or double array, or what. And even further, if you want to optimize your code, then you can define the size of in terms of bit also. So whether it is 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, integer, float, or double or so, right? So these are other more specific objects available in the JavaScript. But all these are arrays. So when we say it's an array, then definitely we can say we'll be having a number of elements in it, and we can access those elements using index values, and that's why it is called indexed collections. And once we have the array, we have number of elements, then obviously we might go for the iteration over all those elements. So there is a for each method available in array object which iterates all those elements, and it requires one parameter to be a function. So we pass a function as parameter, and in that function, whatever process we want to do, we can do it, right? So that's one thing. Okay, sorry, I thought someone raised the hand. Yeah, let's continue. So that's the array object. Then there are a few more structured data objects available, like array buffer, shared array buffer, or data view, or JSON object also. What is JSON? So it's a JavaScript object notation. JSON is being used as a communication language between two systems over the internet. So when we want to transfer data from one system to another system, there must be some kind of common format which both the systems can understand. And earlier there was XML, and nowadays XML is also being used, but JSON is one another format which is mostly used to transmit data. When we call APIs, generally most of the times we receive data in JSON format. So JSON is nothing but a string, a lengthy string which has some format predefined by which we can transfer our data, a labeled data, so it will have a property and a value pair everywhere in that format. So these are some structured data. We define property value pair, and that will be enclosed within curly brackets and square brackets and all, so that once we convert that JSON to array, it will be very easy to convert it. And once we have array, we can iterate it, we can access all those elements. There are array buffers also. So if you want to work with buffers and receiving some data in a big format, and then you want to convert it, you want to access it, then you convert it to some view, data view, and then you can use it. So those are the objects available in JavaScript. And there are plenty of other objects also. As I said, we'll not be covering everything here, but to just brush up our mind that there are number of objects and we can use those objects wherever we need. So those are number of few objects. And as I said, you may also go for MDN website, and you'll find a list of all those objects. And when we explore further, we'll have all the properties and methods available within those objects. So you may explore that thing also. We'll be using some of these objects throughout in this entire course. So when we create some pages or let's say components, and we want to display some kind of things, some data on the screen, we'll be using those kind of objects later on. So that's what the JavaScript objects are. And next thing in your syllabus is error handling. Now, just like Java, we do have error handling part in JavaScript also. So there is a try catch block we can use. The try block, try statement, we can say, is where we can test our code. And if anything fishy happens in that block, let's say anything generates the error, then it goes to the catch block where we can handle our error. And if we don't want to handle our error, we just want to throw that error or customized error to the parent or the callee part, then we can use throw statement to create some custom errors here. And let's say at the top level, there is nothing which we can do, then finally statement, finally block we can use to execute some final workaround for those kind of errors, right? So regardless of any result, final statement, finally block or finally statement, we can write something which we can, let's say at the end of everything, we intimate user that this is not gonna be possible, or let's say that there is an error which cannot be handled, and this will be terminated execution part, or some kind of message there. Now that depends on the application and the need, what we use and how we use. But this is what the blocks or statements we can use to handle our errors. So for example, let's say you try to calculate something in a try block, but let's say it generates a divide by zero error. Then you go to catch block and you write the workaround code. But let's say you don't want to handle that error, then you throw that error to the callee function, and that callee function will handle that error. And even in that callee function, let's say you are not in a position to solve that problem, then using finally statement, you give a message to user that the internal error occurred due to some input data, and further executions will not be done. It will be terminated here. So those kind of error handlings we can go for. Then there is event handling part. Now this is a major thing. Now even you have used events in your previous semester, but when we go for client-side development using JavaScript, we make use of number of events, because whenever we say that we want to have an interactive page, then interaction will be done based on the events generated by end user on the HTML page. So there comes the event handling part. Now, basic events you have already seen or you have used already in your let's say earlier pages, like on change, on click, on mouse over, maybe key down, single click or double click, DBL click event, and so on, right? So I believe that some basic events you might have already used, but I'm afraid of one thing, that you might have used inline events. I believe that you might have used inline events always. But there are a number of ways we can go for event handling, and even those are the preferable ways instead of going for inline events that we'll discuss just now, and we'll also have example for that also here. So right now, let's say, what are the events? So what is event? Then we can say anything that happens on HTML page, we can consider it as an event. So even page loads, so on load is one event. If user clicks somewhere on the page or on any element, then it's a click event. If user makes change of some values in the text field, then there is on change, there is a change event, right? So change event, click event, double click event, mouse over, mouse out, blur, then copy, cut event, drag event, drop event, drag over event, then focus event, and let's say a key press event, key down, key up event. So there are number of events available in the HTML. Now, even you can search for those HTML event list on internet, and you'll have the entire list of all possible events there. Now, when we access those events in HTML part, we prefix on. So that's why it is on change, on click, on mouse over, on mouse out, on load, and so on. Excuse me. So we access those HTML events in HTML code using these words. But simple event is something like change, click, mouse over, mouse out, blur, load, and so on. Okay. Now, what we can do is we can handle these events. So when that event occurs, we can perform some code, and that's what is called the event handling part, right? So how do we handle those events? So for that, we may have number of ways to handle those events. One is the inline event handler. Inline event handler. That is where we use HTML event on click, on blur, on focus, on mouse over, on mouse out, and so on. Now, where do we write it? So with any element starting tag, okay, we have an attribute, event attribute. So on click is the attribute. And then for that attribute, we define a value which will be the JavaScript code. Okay, that will be the JavaScript code. Now that code can be, if it is a single line JavaScript, you can directly write it here. That becomes inline JavaScript. Or let's say you want to perform some bunch of lines, then you can call a function like this way. Okay, so you call a function and you define that function somewhere else in the page, or maybe in the external JavaScript file. So that's what the inline event handler is. So on click and then the function call, on blur and function call, on mouse over and function call, and so on. And even you can have number of events attached to the same element. There is no limitation. You can apply more than one events on the same element if you want. So this is the basic syntax. You have your element start tag, then you go for the event as attribute, and then define JavaScript code as a value. So this is what the example is, and you have used this kind of event handling, I believe. So any one of you does know the other way of applying events? Does anyone knows what are the other ways we can apply events, or we can handle those events? Or is this the thing that everyone had used inline event handlers only? So what do you say? Anyone knows other ways of event handling? Okay. So in your web programming subject, JavaScript event handlings section, that's what I was saying. I'm afraid of this thing. You have used only this thing. That's what the problem is. Now this is very rarely used, or this is not actually preferable way to bind any event with any event HTML element. Now let me show you what are the other ways we can go for. So one is this one. We can have event property. We can have event property. So event handler properties we can use. Instead of going for on-click attribute on the element, we go for the on-click property of the element. Okay, so this on-click event we are binding for our button. Now, from where we have this button, it is coming from the JavaScript query selector, or you may use a get element by ID function or anything. But we are not writing this code with HTML. We separate out this code from the HTML part. So there will be nothing on the HTML, but we access that element first. So document.querySelector or document.getElement by ID, and you have that element. And once you have that element, you define its event property. So element dot, and then whatever event property you want to access. So button dot on click. And then we define the entire function, whatever we want to execute here. Right? So this is second way of applying event to any element, and this is actually the event property. So btn.onClick, and then there is a function, or btn.onDBL-click, and then there is a function, or let's say input field dot on focus, and then there is a function, or let's say input field dot on blur, and then there is a function, and so on. So you can apply like this way. Now, when we are writing a function here, and we are actually assigning this entire function to this event property. So actually this is a function object assigned to this property. Now you may also go for named functions. So you define your function first, and then you use this label or the name of your function to assign that function to the event property. So either you may go for anonymous function like this way. Here we do not have any function name, right? We don't have any function name here. So this is anonymous function applied to this on-click event. Now this is used when you only want to apply this bunch of statements, codes to this event. But let's say if you have a set of statements and you want to apply those set of statements to multiple places, then instead of going for anonymous function, we go for the named function, and then we use this name wherever we want. So that we can use this function at multiple places, right? So that depends on the need. If I want to apply this function at multiple places, then I'll go for named function. And if there is no need of using that function multiple times, then definitely I'll go for anonymous function. So this is the second way of event handling. And even further, if we go for the newer way of applying events handlers, then there is add event listener and remove event listener methods. So the newest type of event handling mechanism is this one, which is defined in the latest version of document object model specification. It provides two functions, add event listener and remove event listener. Now this works similarly as the previous thing we have seen, event handler property. Both are almost same, it works same, but the syntax is different, right? So what is the syntax? Let's have a look at it. We access our element first, and then for this element, instead of defining property, what we do is for that element we call this method add event listener. So btn.onClick, instead of that we use btn.add event listener function. Now this function requires two parameters. First one is the event, which event you want to go for, whether it is click, dbl click, focus, blur, on mouse over, on mouse out, which event you want to bind here. So the first parameter is the event, and the second parameter is the event handler code. So that will be the function. So if you have defined your function separately, then use that function name as a second parameter, or you may define your entire function at this place. Anonymous function you can define here as a second parameter. So that's also possible. Now within the function, whatever code you want to write, that will be common for all these types. Whether you are going for inline, you are going for event handling property, you are going for add event listener method, anyway, your function code, your actual part of the code will be same. There won't be any change, because that's what you want to you want to execute once that event occurs, right? So this is the newest way of doing this thing. But what benefit comes with this is, with add event listener, we have another method, remove event listener also. So once we bind one event listener to event to the element, we will also be in a position to remove that event from that particular event, which was not possible earlier, right? If you go for inline, then there is no way you can remove that event. Even when you apply some property, there is no way that you can reset that property. But if you go for add event listener method, you may have remove event listener method also. So if you add one event listener, then later on, whenever you want, you can also remove event listener. So in the remove event listener, you use the same event and you pass in the same handler code function. Then that will be removed. And once you remove it, then it will not occur when user generates those events. So that's one advantage here, based on a time, based on a need, based on user need or the customization, we can add or we can remove some events or event listeners. That's what the benefit of going for this newest type of event handling. So let's look at all these things practically once, so that everything gets more clear in our mind. So for that, let me bring that code on the screen once. I have one page ready with every code required here, and let me bring that result also. So this is the result of that code. Okay, it's a very simple example to understand all these things with set of buttons here. So let's say we have a page where we have number of buttons, and with all these buttons, when user clicks on that button, so there will be click event. We want to handle that click event, but in a different way. So my first button is the example of inline event handling. So it has inline label. Second button is to understand the event handling property. Third button is for add event listener. So it's based on a listener. And the fourth button is to check how we can remove the existing listener. So we have generated a set of buttons here, and we'll be understanding those events one by one. So the first one is the inline. So for inline, the syntax is within your start tag, you use event attribute. So on click is the attribute. And then as a value, either you can write your JavaScript code directly here, or what you can do is you can call a function where you write a set of statements. So right now what we do is on this button, on click event, I'm going to call one function, bg change 1. Now I have defined that function in a script tag here. Now this is a document level script. So I only define type. I don't have source attribute here. Now within this script tag, I have that function bg change 1 function. This is the example of inline event handler. Now within this function, I'm generating one random color code or random color, and then I apply that random color to my entire page. Now how do I do that? So I use document.body. So I'm applying that background color for that body entire page using style property, and within style I use the background color property, and I assign that color. Now when I'm generating that random color, I use a random function, which is again user defined, but it is only using math.random function. So this is the math object, right? So math.random is going to give me a random number in between 0 to 1, and I want a range from 0 to 255, so I multiply it with 255 here. So this result will be in between 0 to 255. So I'm using RGB to generate my color. So the first number will be for red component, second number will be for green component, and third value will be for blue component. So RGB, I'll generate one number, one random color, and then I'll apply that color to the background of my entire page. Now this happens when I click on this button, right? Because I have bind on click event. So if we click on this inline button, it will call this function. This function will first generate a random color, and then it'll apply that random color to the background. So let us have a look at the result here. When I load my page, I have applied nothing. So by default, it's a white color here. But when I click on this button, it is going to call that function and it'll change my background color. So when I click here, it changes the background color. But remember, it's on-click event. Every time user clicks on this button, it is going to change the color, right? So when I click on this button, every time that function will be called, and it is going to update the background color here. So that's inline. Okay, this is the example of going for inline event handler. But the problem here is it combines your HTML code with some JavaScript code. And if you do have number of events to be handled here, then it gets complex. That's why the preferable way is for going for property. Now, when you look at this line, it only has the HTML code. That's it. There is no JavaScript code at this place. So it separates the JavaScript code with the HTML code, just like we do it with the HTML and CSS. So we apply kind of a, let's say, class or ID to this button. And using this ID or a class, we can access that element in JavaScript. So that's what the next example we want to have a look at, the event handler properties. So for this property button, we have ID property. So what we'll do is by using getElementById or the query selector method of document object, we can access that element. We can access that button. And once we have that button, we use the onClick property here. So button.onClick, and then we will assign entire function. Now this function is similar to the first one. There is no change, right? And as long as I'm assigning this function directly to this property, I haven't used any function name at this place. So this is anonymous function, we can say. So this is the second example of going for event handler properties. So the result will be same on your page. There won't be any change. If I reload this page, initially it is white, but when I click on this property button, it is going to change the background color randomly. Result is same. End user doesn't know how everything happens. But the benefit of going for this one is it separates the HTML code and JavaScript code, right? So this is the example for going the anonymous function. Now, if you want to go for named functions, then also you may go for it like this one, right? You access your button, you define your function, and then button.onClick event, and you assign that function name here. Instead of assigning entire function, we assign function name. So that's also proper way or equal. Just the thing is, if you have a named function, then you can use this name at multiple places. That's one benefit of going for named functions. And the result will be same, no change on your page. If you reload and click on property function button, same thing happens here, right? So that's the way with which you can go for named functions. And that was your second button, property labeled. The third way is the latest way of going for event handling, which is we go for the listeners here, right? So the third button is a listener, and we have ID for this. So what we'll do is we'll access this element in the JavaScript, and then we will add a listener for this button. So let's go for add event listener method. So first thing, we access that button as button 3. We define our function. This is the same function. If you don't want to have this bg change 3, then you can use this bg change 2, or even you can use this bg change 1, because all these functions are same, right? So we have a function. Then how do we bind this function with the event? So for that, we use add event listener method. Okay. Within that method, the first thing is your event. So we want to go for the click event. Look, this is event itself. So this is not on click, it is simply click. Don't write on click here. Okay. On click is the property. Click is the event. So the first thing is the event, and the second parameter is your function name. Okay, second parameter is your function name. If you have named function. Now, if you don't want to go for name, then you can write your entire anonymous function at this place. Second parameter will be function. So that's how we bind a function to the event. And once we do this thing, same thing will happen on the client side. When we click on this listener button, it is going to change the background color. So the syntax and the way we bind this thing differs, but the result is identical in all three different ways. But when we go for this thing, the benefit that we have is we can remove this event handler whenever we want. So if I add event listener here, then I can also remove event listener for that thing. Now, when I want to remove it, so for example, let's say we have another button here to remove the event listener. When I click on this thing, I want to remove event listener from this button. Remember, we bind event for this third button, but when I click on this one, I want to remove event from the same button, third button. I want to remove it. Okay. So, but when I click on this button, this remove listener button will have a click event. But within that click event, I'm going to remove event listener for button 3. So for that fourth button we have here, we are going to access this element, this button, and we will register event listener for this. So we will access that fourth button, and for that fourth button, we will register a click event. Okay. Now within that click event, when I go for performing any operation, then at that time, I'll say that from button 3, I want to remove event listener. Now, which event listener I want to remove from button 3? So for button 3, we have added click event with bg change 3 function. So we will use this same parameters in remove event listener. So we go for click event, and which function? Bg change 3 function. That will be removed. Okay, that will be removed. So let us have a look at the effect, what happens, and then we will understand what is this thing, right? So for button 3, we add an event listener, and when we click on button 4, we remove that event listener. So if I reload this page, and when I click on this listener button, it is going to change those colors. But once I click on this remove event listener button, it has removed that listener. Okay, so now if I go back and click on this listener button, there won't be any change because that event listener has been removed from this place, right? So that's one more benefit of having this methods, add event listener and remove event listener. Now, before we complete or conclude this session, let me quickly explain this thing. This is the arrow function. It's defined in the ES6 version of standardized formats for JavaScript. ES6 is ECMAScript 6. So this is called arrow function. So even by this way, you need not to write function keyword. Okay, you need not to write a function keyword. You simply define your bracket, then arrow, and then curly bracket and the body of your entire function. So that's called arrow function. And within these simple brackets, you can define your parameters if you want. Now, as long as this is the event, we may have one event parameter, and using this event parameter, we can access any properties related to event if we want. So using this E, even we can access the target on which element this click event has been occurred. So E.target, you can access the target button for using E. So that's what the arrow function is. We will be using these arrow functions in Angular when we go for those things. And at that time, again, I'll explain what is the syntax and how it executes everything. Yeah. So that's all we want to cover today. So we had gone for starting basics of JavaScript. Then we have listed few JavaScript objects. We have seen how we can have error handling. And then we had gone for event handler part. So this is where we conclude today's session. And from the next session, we will go for the document object model, DOM. Just a minute, let me have your last attendance here, and then you may leave. Just let me verify that everything is proper. Yeah, done. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this session, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.